Hey there, creepy peeps. My name is Nightmare Maven and I love talking about horror movies. I'm also a Cancer sign. So whether you ascribe to astrology or not, if you look up any like Cancer sign memes, I pretty much 100% fit that meme, especially all of the Cancer memes about like how much we cry. Like I cry if a commercial is too sad, if a certain song comes on, and sometimes even horror movies make me cry. So I asked you guys on Instagram for some video ideas, and one of you, shout out to Mel, came up with this idea to talk about horror movies that have made me cry, and I thought I would combine that idea with a concept that I feel like you guys really like whenever I do these sort of videos, and that is the tier ranking list. Plus, also with Cancer season being right around the corner, I figured I had to do this video. So you can skip to the ranking if you'd like, just go to this time right here, but I'm going to quickly explain how I'm ranking these because I do have a system for this one. So when I start talking about these movies and how they emotionally scarred me, I'm not talking about how scary they are. I'm talking about how like sad or upset or depressed they made me. So anything towards the bottom of the tier ranking list most likely made me emotional, maybe messed me up for like the next day or two, but ultimately didn't make me cry. The higher up we go, the more these movies emotionally scarred me, and probably for longer. Somewhere around like the A tier most likely made me cry the first time I watched it, but maybe not subsequent times. And God tier is reserved for the horror movies that consistently make me cry every single time I've watched them, no matter how good of a mood I'm in, no matter how many times I've seen it. All right, so first one we're gonna talk about is The Strangers. Now, this one affected me more definitely in the scary sense, but that's not what we're talking about here. And I guess you could kind of say it did scar me because of how scary it was. But with this movie, I specifically remember being just emotionally shook by the ending in particular, when the scene that we're seeing actually in the the poster, where, you know, our main characters are about to be killed and it is broad daylight, which is normally when everything is supposed to be better, everything's supposed to solve itself. I didn't cry watching this movie at all, but I did watch it a lot for the first time and a lot of times afterward as a teenager, and it definitely reiterated that sometimes bad and violent things happen just in broad daylight and sometimes for no reason. So I'm almost 29 years old now, so I'm now used to the world being like that. So I think at this point, this movie is E tier. Okay, next movie I'm going to talk about is I Am Legend, and I think if you've seen this movie, you know exactly what part of the movie I'm talking about. The dog. Ever since my first watch of this movie, I have not been able to stomach that scene at all. Like anytime I find myself rewatching this, or if it comes on the TV and somebody else is watching it, like I will physically leave the room before this scene comes on and not come back until after it's done. I just cannot watch it. I know for sure I would cry if I let myself rewatch this scene ever, but I haven't, so I guess technically I've only cried watching this movie one time. But I think it also counts for something that I know how emotional this scene makes me, so I will like physically leave in order to avoid that. So I think that is at least C tier, if nothing else. All right, next is Martyrs, the original one, of course. If you can sit and watch this movie and not be emotionally affected by it at all, I don't know if I trust you. Or I might just be terrified of you. Maybe a little of both. This movie puts you through the ringer emotionally and kind of physically. Like, I don't know about anybody else, but I definitely felt like I had been beaten and tortured physically by the end of this movie as well. This may have actually, now that I'm thinking about it, been the first movie just in general I had ever seen where I was like genuinely concerned for my mental well-being after watching it. Like this affected me for days I don't know if it went longer than a week, but it was a scary long time where I was like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna be okay again. I didn't cry though, surprisingly, but I think it was because I was just like too stunned by what I was watching. But it's possibly just one of the most emotionally scarring movies ever. But for me, I think it's B tier here. Still near the top though, because yeah. Okay, next one I'm gonna rank here is Odd Thomas. Not technically a horror movie, I don't think, but the main character, Odd, sees ghosts, so horror adjacent at least. I remember I watched this movie for the first time after Anton Yelchin, the actor who plays Odd, was in that horrible accident and died, and that definitely played a part in me crying at the end of this movie. Nothing against Anton Yelchin, but I never like felt like any like connection to him as an actor or anything like that. Like everything I'd seen him in has always been great. And Odd is not the character who dies at the end, but somehow just like that ending with him and Stormy, like that scene, just for whatever reason, like paired with the fact that I knew that that actor is not with us anymore, made me really sad, and I cried like a baby. I only have ever cried at this movie at the first time I'd seen it, but still a really sad ending. So I think it's A tier for me. I know that's weird to put it Martyrs, I feel like, but like I said, since the topic is movies that made me cry, I have to give the higher ones to the movies that actually made me shed tears. All right, next is Night of the Living Dead, which might be kind of like a surprising entry. I don't think I ever hear anybody talking about how this movie emotionally scarred them, but it's the end, of course. If you've seen this movie, you probably know what I'm referring to, but this is one of those movies where I was like just like dazed and stunned a little at the end, at least for the rest of the day, if I remember correctly, because that ending is such a gut punch. We watch our hero survive the night, not only fending off the undead, but surviving being the lone person of color in a house full of scared white people. I don't know if it was that much of a trope back then that the people of color in horror movies always die first, but the triumph I felt at the end of the movie that he made it. He was scarred for sure, emotionally, but he made it. And then the other people show up and you're kind of like, yes, he's been saved. And then, you know, he appears at the window and boom, he's dead. Another one for the fire. And all of a sudden, all of those white guys that just showed up to save the day start kind of looking like a lynch mob, and it's just, ugh, that ending. That always gets me. It's always so frustrating and just sad when a character makes it all the way to the end for something so simple to get them. It wasn't even zombies. It's an ending that definitely makes you want to punch your screen, for sure. Didn't make me cry, just a good emotional sucker punch to the gut. But I don't think it's the most emotionally damaging on this list, so it's F tier. Still needed to be talked about though. All right, major spoilers for this one, Jacob's Ladder. If you're like me and somehow have not seen this movie still have not had it spoiled for you, it's not talked about so much in the horror community. I had first seen this movie like quite recently. I think it's maybe only been a year, less than 2 years for sure, and I had somehow gone that entire time without having the ending spoiled for me, which is the best way to see anything, but especially this movie. And I think I mentioned it in my review of Jacob's Ladder the first time I had seen it. I just after that ending, I just sat there and watched the credits roll, like with my mouth just wide open. At that point, I was already emotional towards the end of the movie, like when Jacob sees his dead son again, and then they like climb the stairs, and you're like, oh, it's kind of sad. I got a little misty-eyed. And then, you know, that bright white light comes in, and you're kind of like, ah, okay, it's like a bittersweet ending. And then the medical tent back in Vietnam fades in, and you're kind of like, the fuck? Like, that actual ending didn't make me cry, but I I was like thinking about the ending to that movie for days after watching this. It just stuck with me, and it still has. Like, I honestly wish I could, you know, like a little like neuralizer thing, just like wipe my brain of this movie specifically and just keep rewatching it again for the first time. I didn't cry though. And at this point I kind of like love the ending. Like, I love how much of a gut punch that ending is, you know, kind of a masochistic way. So I'm gonna give it a D. We might as well get all of the like gut punch shocker endings out of the way now. The Mist. You guys know what part I'm talking about. The very end. Oh, that scene. The thing with this one is I feel like it's not even that original of a twist. I mean, I was in high school. I did read Romeo and Juliet. It's like, when I think about it, I feel like it's kind of low-hanging fruit that like, he does this awful thing and then like a minute later he's saved, so like you're frustrated. If you had just waited like 30 more seconds, everybody would be saved. It's especially bad after you just watch these characters like survive so much, especially that like crazy religious lady that I know we all love to hate. But I guess it just goes to show that these classic twists are still pretty effective, because that was a rough ending, especially because not that everybody like died particularly, like they decided to end their own lives, and he is now, our main character, the dad or whatever, is now left alive with the realization of what he just did. And if he had just waited like 60 seconds, they would have all been okay. Definitely a gut punch ending, definitely affected me. It's still tough and frustrating to watch too, even though I know what's gonna happen every time I rewatch this, so I think I'll give it a C. Alright, next one I'm going to talk about is The Haunting of Bly Manor. I know it's not a movie, but when I started thinking about the horror movies that have emotionally affected me, this is one of the first ones I thought of, so I had to include it. I ended up binging this series, I think over the course of like 2 or 3 days, because it was just so compelling. I loved the characters. So of course, as we start to get towards the end of the series and more things are revealed and more twists start happening, it just, you know, like rips my heart out and just like crumples it up in front of me. Like, not even just with Danny, but like Mrs. Gross. Like, I still get sad every time I think about Mrs. Gross's character. Like, you're rooting for the characters so hard, and that's just what makes like the tragic ending that much more tragic. And the sad thing is, like, you're literally expecting what happens to Danny at the end. Like, they set it up, you know, eventually their like happy fairy tale ending is going to end and it's gonna not be good. So you're expecting it to happen and it still hurts. And then on top of that, like, as if they're not done emotionally wrecking you at the end, there's the reveal of the storyteller's identity, which even if you guessed that towards the beginning, it's still just like when they show like their older selves and then their younger selves, it's just, oh man. I cried like a little baby. So I think for that reason, it is gonna get A tier. Right up there with Odd Thomas. What a weird combo. I think saving the saddest ones for last was probably a mistake, because I think you guys are probably going to figure out where these last ones are going. But let's talk about the final girls. So this is a newer entry on the horror movies that made me cry list. I mean, I always thought it was like a sad story. Like, it's just, you know, it's definitely an emotional story with like the mother-daughter relationship. You feel for her. You feel for her whether you've lost a loved one or not. But this movie hits way different. Way different if you're like me and decided to like watch this and have a good cry after your own mom passed. So I cried like the whole time, even though there are so many funny points in this movie. I think this is definitely the strangest movie that I think I've cried all the way through, but it hits so much harder watching it now. So for that reason, I think you guys know where this is going. It goes in God tier. I'm gonna cut it off a little bit there, but I got one more to talk about, and I think you guys know where it's going, so let me leave some room. All right, last one. Can you figure out which one it is? I feel like anytime the topic of like emotional horror movies come up, Train to Busan is part of the conversation. Anytime anybody just talks about this movie in general, like one of the main things that gets discussed is how badly we all cry at the end. I mean, just like filmmaking wise, this movie is a great example of how important empathy is to the horror genre. Everything is more tense and more terrifying if you're attached to the characters and you don't want to see anything bad happen to them. So eventually, like when they all start dying or getting hurt, you feel something. It evokes emotion out of you, and this movie not only does that, like I know everybody likes to talk about the end with the dad you know, sacrificing himself to save the daughter, but I think you see it throughout the whole movie, like with the older sisters, like our young couple with like the baseball player guy, like the school kids, everyone's favorite badass character, and of course daddy issues himself. Like those are all just like really sad points, and you care about the characters, and you hate what happens to them. I wish they all could have survived. And then of course, like at the very end, when the little girl starts singing in the tunnel, it's just like, if you weren't crying before, you're most likely crying at that point. It gets me every time, consistently, no matter how good of a mood I'm in. God tier. God tier. God tier. So there you have it. Those are definitely at least top 10, like like what I consider to be emotional horror movies. Whether you're looking at some of these and you're kind of like, Vicky, I don't think some of these are that emotional. Whatever, they are to me. So please, please, please share your favorite tearjerker horror movies in the comments section. We'll be like the cult in Midsummer, and we'll all just like collectively sob together. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here. Become a creepy peep today. I post 2 new videos a week, so I will see you soon with a new video. Until then though, stay strange. Bye.